Hi, this is Rabbi Zuker. I'm on my deck on this beautiful day, and I wanted to share some thoughts with you about the Parsha this week and about the state of the world. When it's such a beautiful day, we don't want to forget how serious what's happening in the world is, and just how devastating and how tumultuous and intense this period of time is for Black people in America and in Canada and all over the world, and for everyone else who is and wants to be an ally and a supporter of Black people in our communities and our brothers and sisters. And so as all this has been unfolding, and I have been, confronting my desire to be a better ally and a better person, I've been educating myself as much as I can, listening to a lot of different voices. I tend to listen to a lot of podcasts, and there's one podcast that I'll commend it to you. It's called Throughline. It's a podcast about history from NPR in the States, and there was a podcast about the history of policing, and they they interviewed a historian from the Harvard Kennedy School named Khalil Gibran Muhammad. He's a historian. He talks about how the first police forces in America were actually slave patrols in the South. They were made up of all white men. All white men were required to participate in enforcing what was called the slave code, which was designed to control the lives of Black slaves entirely. And this was not just a permission, but really a duty that all whites were given to control the lives of Blacks. And this included a permission to dispense corporal punishment on the scene. And it's shocking, and there's a lot to reckon with in terms of the history of how policing in America develops from that initiation point. But the detail that caught my attention in the context of this week's Parsha was that Dr. Gibran Muhammad mentions that every man from the ages of 21 to 45 was required to be conscripted into this force. And this is how our Torah portion opens, describing a census that's taken, that all men from the ages of 30 to 50 are required to participate in service. In the context of the Torah portion, it's a little bit more complicated, because normally a census is taken in the Torah in order to raise an army, to see who the men of fighting age are. Here it's a census of the Levites, who are specifically exempt from military service because they have these duties in the tabernacle. And so, it's a counting of people not for their military service, but for a different kind of service, a holy service. I think often when we see a census in the Torah, what we intuit and what we hope is that what's being counted is each person, because every soul is precious and deserves an eternity of dignity, and we hope that the count is about the preciousness of every human soul. Unfortunately, that isn't really what the count is in this instance. The count is about gathering together those who will participate in this service. And any feminist reader, and I hope that most of us are feminist readers of the Torah, notices right away that there is that this count is of men, and only of men, not of women. When we see these blindnesses in our tradition that are caused by the history of patriarchy that infects everywhere, right? It's hard not to, for me at least, not to get my hackles up, my feminist hackles up that continue to be frustrated with patriarchy, because this isn't just an issue in a few places, right? This carries through, and in the Torah, in the context of the Torah, it affects women's lives. Later on in this very Parsha, we have the description of the ritual of the sotah, of the suspected adulteress. When a husband suspects his wife of adultery, he doesn't have to have any evidence, and it's not something that she could ever accuse him of. It's a one-way perverse justice system where the priests administer this trial by ordeal to discern her culpability, and it's just one example of how the system of patriarchy in the Torah clearly leaves women at a disadvantage and victimizes them in some serious ways, and so we see that this patriarchy not only leads to sort of a general militarism of the way that that stock is taken in order for military purposes, but that people suffer because of this. And I say this not because there's any way to create a parallel between women in the time of the Torah, white women today, and the experiences of Black people. That's not the point. The stakes are different. white women's lives are not at risk in the way that black people's lives, and especially black men's lives, are at risk in this day and age. But I share this because I find myself, for a long time, and this is my orientation, these instances of patriarchy, they hit me in somewhere visceral, and they make me angry, and they make me want to seek redress, and they make me want to do something. And maybe you respond that way as well when you see patriarchy. Maybe you respond that way when you see anti-Semitism, that it hits you somewhere that is just visceral, and that your anger flares and you need to react. And that is how we all should be feeling about the white supremacy that we see in the world around us, because they're all the same things. And I'm no expert, but I know that this is the idea of intersectionality, that the suffering that I as a woman may have felt that I experienced, or the suffering that I as a Jewish person may have felt that I experienced because of that difference, builds the compassion in me to recognize the humanity in every other. And I find myself, and it's so distressing, and we must not shy away from the distress. Just imagine that you're whoever you are and you're sleeping in your bed, and the SS just busts through the door and shoots you in your bed, and you're dead. And this is what happened to Breonna Taylor. Right? Imagine that. And, when it comes to patriarchy, I think about how, I hope it's not still the case, but certainly I and every woman I know my age and older than me was trained to be prepared and make sure you do everything that you can not to get raped. Right? You have to carry your keys between your fingers, and don't dress that way, and never be alone. And it's your job as a woman to make sure you don't get raped. And it's infuriating, and we tolerate it, and sometimes still tolerate ideas in that direction for too long. I can't even but imagine that you're any black parent that has to teach your child, your son, how to not get murdered by the police. It's that same rage that comes into me when I think about that. And it's overwhelming because it's so huge. It's systemic. The patriarchy, the white supremacy, it's in our culture. It has seeped into us. And because it's a system, it's incumbent upon all of us to figure out what to do about it. And so here's what I want to offer you, because there's so much, and I don't pretend to have answers, but here's where I'm holding with this right now. As sort of the Jewish world is beginning to look forward to the high holidays and pivot towards what this really interesting and different high holiday season will mean, and we refocus on what the purpose of this time is, we say in our prayer service, tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, that tshuva, repentance, and prayer, and tzedakah, charitable giving, will overturn the negative decree. And this is sort of an idea that's been circulating on Rabbi Facebook, is perhaps this year, when tefillah, when gathering and communal worship is not possible in the way that it has been before, we'll focus on other things. We'll focus on tzedakah, on giving, and we'll focus on tshuva, on repentance. And when we talk about tshuva, we talk about it every year. It's not new that we should be thinking about tshuva, but it's an internal process, right? We talk about, the internal process of how we are judged and how God sees the insides of us, and that there's nothing we can hide. And we talk not only about the things that we do, right, but we also talk very much about the things that we say, and even the things that we think. We acknowledge that our minds are not a place that is exempt from God's view, and that we're responsible for our thoughts as well. And I have full confidence that the people watching this, the people that interact in our community, we are good people. Our actions are good. We are not overt racists doing racist things in the world actively. I know that. And our speech is good. We are not dropping racial slurs. Maybe we say the wrong thing sometimes, and that is something we need to attend to and learn about and get better at. But we're not racists in our speech. We are racists in our thoughts. And this is the hard part to acknowledge, and it's not our fault. And I'll talk about myself. I have racist thoughts. I have patriarchal thoughts. I can see a woman who, and make judgments, right, instinctual judgments right away about her, about what she's wearing, about what she's doing, whatever. And I have worked on catching that and untraining that and naming it and draining it of its power, because I don't want there to be patriarchy in the world. And so these racist thoughts that, because we have all lived in a white supremacist society for our whole lives, these racist thoughts that come into our heads that are difficult to admit that we have because they're so socially unacceptable, and they're morally unacceptable to other people, they're morally unacceptable to me. The work, the tshuva, is to see those thoughts, to catch them, to understand them as being the systemic racism that we need to do away with, and to get better at seeing them and dismissing them. So that's how I'm thinking about the tshuva today. A friend and teacher of mine, Rabbi Shir Koningsberg, wrote about this parsha and wrote about the way that the details that are described in the beginning of the different pieces of the tabernacle that are carried by each family and how they're carried, right, are important for us, even though they seem like these sort of microscopic details, that organizational structures, administrative structures matter, right? The structures in our society, they matter. And the way that we count, and just circling back to that point of census, the heart of this, of all of this, is the absolute sanctity and dignity of every human life. Black lives matter. Black lives are the lives that are at risk today by police violence, and at risk by our indifference and our ignorance and our willful blindness to these problems, white people. And so I pray for a world that we can build and that we can commit to create together, that is a world of true justice, that sees the dignity and value in every individual, and that acknowledges that Black lives matter. So, Shabbat Shalom.